He who has ears to hear, let him hear. There are few surviving texts from the ancient world as enigmatic and evocative as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. To encounter its fragmented wisdom is to step beyond conventional theology and enter a realm of profound introspection, as if crossing a hidden threshold meant only for those ready to see. Here, the familiar boundaries of faith begin to dissolve, and a deeper path quietly emerges, inviting us to look inward, to confront the illusions of the material world, and to rediscover the divine essence within ourselves. This is no ordinary gospel. Unlike the canonical texts, with their emphasis on external miracles, hierarchical structures, and the codification of faith, the Gospel of Mary unfolds a way that is deeply personal and transformative. It does not anchor belief in spectacle or authority, but calls each seeker into direct experience. Though portions of the manuscript were lost to history, including the first 6 pages and sections of pages 11 through 14, what remains carries a message of striking power. It speaks not of salvation as a distant reward granted at the end of time, but of liberation as an immediate possibility, accessible through a sacred knowledge known as Gnosis. Gnosis is not the memorization of doctrine or the repetition of creeds. It is the knowing that awakens when the veil between the self and the divine is lifted, when a luminous thread connecting the soul to its eternal source is felt rather than explained. In these surviving words, we are not led through outward ritual or imposed law. We are invited to step beyond distraction, to let old certainties fall away, and to enter the inner sanctum of the heart and mind, where transformation does not merely promise freedom, but begins it. If the true sanctuary is hidden inside your own heart and mind, what happens to everything you were taught to fear, worship, and obey on the outside? This is the unsettling question that quietly rises when you step into the world of the Gospel of Mary, a text so radical for its time that it almost feels like it is speaking directly to the part of you that has always felt out of place in conventional religion. Here, spirituality is not chained to rigid rules or distant authorities, but loosened, softened, made fluid and intimate, like a conversation you were never supposed to overhear but somehow did. In this gospel, what you have been told about sin, matter, and salvation does not get politely adjusted, it gets turned inside out. The familiar scaffolding that often ties spirit to dogma is carefully taken apart, not to leave you in chaos, but to reveal something more instinctive beneath it, something you may have felt all along, but never had words for. At the center of this hidden narrative stands a woman you've probably heard about your entire life, but rarely like this. Mary, not as a footnote, not as a symbol of shame or devotion, but as a figure of piercing insight. She appears like a lantern in a dark room, a quiet presence among anxious men, holding a kind of inner certainty that feels both disarming and strangely familiar, as if you are watching an older, braver version of yourself. Her calm, steady voice in this text does not command or threaten, it invites. It calls you back to a dignity you may have traded away piece by piece just to feel accepted, loved, forgiven. It suggests that what you are seeking is not something you earn through perfection, but something you remember through honesty. Yet the path shown here is not gentle, in the way comfort is gentle. The Gospel of Mary does not pretend that waking up is easy. It speaks of illusions woven into the material world, of fear that grips like iron around the ribs, of ignorance that settles over the mind like thick fog. It does not tell you to avoid these things or escape them, but to move through them, to treat them as the fire that tempers metal. Your confusion, your shame, your restless longing are not presented as proof that you are spiritually broken, but as the exact conditions under which your soul can be refined. In one of its most haunting images, the Savior tells Mary and the others that all nature, all formations, all creatures exist in and with one another, and will, in the end, return to their own roots. Nothing stands alone, nothing is permanent in the way we imagine, and everything is on its way back to the source from which it came. This dissolving is not portrayed as annihilation, but as transformation, like ice turning back into water. If you listen closely, you might feel the ground of your usual fears begin to tremble a little. What if the parts of your life that seem to be falling apart are not punishments, but invitations to return? The text we have does not start neatly at the beginning. The first 6 pages are gone, along with a section in the middle, pages 11 through 14. What survived is only a fragment of a larger work, like a sacred letter torn and scattered across centuries. And yet, in what remains, there is a pulse, a kind of condensed power. The surviving portion begins midway through chapter 4. Even there, in the middle of a broken manuscript, the teaching is strong enough to challenge how most of us have been trained to see ourselves. The Savior speaks of the world as a web of interdependence, where every created thing is connected and destined to return to its root. Matter is not treated as evil, but it is not ultimate either. It is cyclical, temporary, a changing surface over a deeper reality. Then something truly provocative appears: the denial of sin as an inherent stain glued to the soul. Instead, sin is described almost like a distortion, a pattern that emerges when actions fall out of harmony with the divine rhythm. It is not a permanent label stamped on your being, but a state of disharmony that can be healed. In this telling, the good, or the divine essence, enters the world not to condemn, but to restore, to call every being back to its original spiritual state. If you have ever carried the heavy, secret belief that you are fundamentally wrong at your core, these words might land like a quiet earthquake. The call here is not, "Be good so you can be loved," but you are rooted in something good, and you have forgotten. The remedy is not self-hatred, it is reconnection. The Savior, in this fragment, does not urge his followers to cling tighter to external systems for security. Instead, he encourages them to be courageous when life becomes harsh, when the world feels hostile or confusing. He tells them to seek the divine within themselves and utters a line that, if you let it, can follow you for the rest of your life. The Son of Man is within you, not outside, not locked in a building, not held exclusively by any group, but within. He warns them not to be deceived by distractions that pull their attention outward and away from this inner presence. He cautions against adding new chains, against building systems that suffocate the soul's movement. The emphasis here is not rebellion for its own sake, but spiritual autonomy, a kind of inner authority that does not need constant permission to exist. Before he departs, he entrusts his followers with a task: to share a way of seeing rooted in liberation and self-awareness. Not a brand, not a system to control others, but a current of freedom that begins inside and naturally ripples outward. And yet, the moment he is gone, those left behind collapse into something painfully human: grief, fear, the instinct to hide. They worry about what will happen to them, about persecution, about survival. They do what many of us do when the familiar presence that guided us goes silent. They doubt everything, especially themselves. It is in this fragile space that Mary steps forward. She doesn't scold them for their fear. She doesn't pretend to be unaffected. Instead, she speaks words that steady the atmosphere, words that remind them of what they have already heard but are about to abandon. She recalls a vision, one that was given to her not as a reward for perfection, but as a whispered insight into how the inner world is structured. In that vision, the Savior speaks of the mind positioned between the soul and the spirit, a kind of bridge or gateway through which divine truth can be perceived. This is not the mind as anxious chatter, but the mind as a clear, quiet space that can turn in two directions, toward illusion or toward revelation. Here, the central theme of this gospel begins to crystallize: liberation through self-knowledge, through inner sight, through a direct connection to the divine that does not require a mediator standing between you and your own source. The vision Mary shares is not just an ancient mystical story, it is a mirror held up to the human journey. It starts not in victory, but in bondage. The material world and its passions bind the soul into cycles of suffering and forgetfulness. You may recognize this in your own life, the repeated patterns, the compulsions, the ways you keep returning to the same wounds, as if you were living the same day in different costumes. Yet even in this sobering diagnosis, the text plants an invitation. It declares that matter gives birth to a passion that has no equal, arising from something contrary to nature. This is not a dry metaphysical statement. It is a description of that restless fire inside you that seems to pull you away from what you know is good. The drive that distorts love into attachment, desire into addiction, ambition into self-destruction. In this view, these passions are not just bad emotions to suppress, but primal forces born from disconnection from your own source. They throw the soul out of tune with itself. You can feel it whenever you chase something that never satisfies, and then wonder why you feel emptier afterward. For the Gnostic imagination behind this gospel, the world of matter functions almost like a dream, vivid and convincing, but layered with distractions. Lesser powers, sometimes called archons, rule this realm of illusion, intensifying those passions, pulling the soul deeper into forgetting. Suffering, in this light, is not a divine sentence handed down from above, but the natural outcome of living out of sync with what you truly are. Other traditions have echoed this pattern in their own language, the way Buddhism speaks of suffering born from craving, or how Stoic thought speaks of passions as disturbances of the soul. Yet here there is a particular twist, the sense that this suffering is not just an unfortunate side effect of being human, but a sign that the soul itself has been twisted away from its own nature, which belongs to something beyond the purely material. And into this tangle, a single phrase cuts like a blade through cloth: be courageous. The voice of the Savior is not indulgent and not cruel. It is sobering, but strangely kind. Courage, in this context, is not the Hollywood version of heroism. It is the quiet decision to face what you have been running from inside yourself, to meet the different forms of nature around you and within you, not with numbness or denial, but with clarity. To see that what you cling to is transient and still choose to open your hand. The struggles of your life are not dismissed as trivial here, nor are they glorified. They are framed as the very furnace in which your soul learns what it is made of. The text invites you to consider the possibility that the pressure you feel, the sense of being trapped in patterns you do not understand, might actually be the beginning of a very different kind of journey. Not a battle to conquer the world, but an awakening to something already living within you, waiting for you to notice. And that waiting presence within you, the one hinted at in the midst of struggle, does not remain passive forever. It begins to rise. As the Gospel of Mary unfolds, the focus shifts from the weight of being trapped in matter to the trembling, dangerous beauty of Ascent. This is not an escape fantasy, not a promise that you will float above the world untouched. It is a confrontation. The soul, having recognized its entanglement, begins to move upward, and in doing so, it meets the very forces that kept it asleep. The text describes these forces as powers, not monsters with claws and fangs, but presences that question, accuse, and attempt to pull the soul back into identification with illusion. If you listen carefully, you can hear their voices in your own mind. As the soul ascends, one of these powers demands, "Where do you come from, slayer of men? And where are you going, conqueror of space?" The language is mythic, almost cosmic, yet the drama is intimate. The soul is being challenged at the threshold of freedom. The accusation suggests guilt, violence, presumption, as if awakening itself were an act of rebellion against the order of things, and perhaps it is. To step out of unconscious patterns can feel like betraying everything you were taught to obey, but the soul does not shrink. It responds with a declaration that feels like a quiet thunderclap. What binds me has been slain, and what turns me about has been overcome. This is not a boast. It is a recognition. The chains were never ultimate. They were sustained by ignorance. When awareness dawns, their grip weakens. One of the most striking insights in this ascent is the realization that the all is being dissolved. This does not mean that existence vanishes into nothingness. It points to the impermanence of the structures that once seemed absolute. The roles you cling to, the identities you defend, the fears that define your choices begin to lose their solidity. The powers that once appeared invincible derive their strength from your belief in them. When the soul sees through them, not with contempt but with clarity, something loosens. This is where the idea of Gnosis becomes sharper. It is not information, it is recognition. The moment comes when you see that the voice telling you that you are small, guilty, and separate is not the deepest truth about you. The ascent continues, and the text describes a fourth power that manifests in 7 forms. These forms are named with a directness that feels almost surgical: darkness, desire, ignorance, the excitement of death, the kingdom of the flesh, the foolish wisdom of flesh, and the wrathful wisdom. Each one is like a layer of distortion laid over the soul's vision. Darkness is not just the absence of light, it is the forgetting of your origin. Desire is not simple longing, it is the hunger that never rests, that convinces you fulfillment is always one step away. Ignorance is not stupidity, it is the refusal to question inherited assumptions. The excitement of death can be read as the strange fascination with destruction, the way we sometimes sabotage what we love. The kingdom of the flesh represents over-identification with the temporary body and its fears. The foolish wisdom of flesh suggests the arrogance of thinking surface knowledge is ultimate truth, and the wrathful wisdom is the mind consumed by anger, convinced that domination equals strength. When you hear this list, it can feel uncomfortably familiar. These are not ancient abstractions, they are living patterns in modern life. The endless scroll of distraction, the chase for validation, the pride in being right, the quiet envy, the outrage that simmers just beneath the surface. The text does not instruct the soul to run from these forms. Instead, the soul moves through them. It acknowledges their presence without surrendering its identity to them. This is crucial. Liberation is not achieved by pretending these forces do not exist. It is achieved by seeing them clearly and refusing to confuse them with your essence. As each layer is encountered, the soul's clarity deepens. It is as if you are peeling away masks you have worn for so long that you forgot they were masks. And then comes the declaration that feels like a turning point, not just in the story, but in the psyche. What binds me has been slain, what turns me about has been overcome, and ignorance has died. These words are not spells, they are the articulation of a shift in perception. The fetter of oblivion, the forgetfulness of divine origin, dissolves. In its place emerges an awareness that the soul belongs to something vast, something not confined by decay. This is described not as a personal triumph in the egoic sense, but as a reintegration into harmony. The ascent is less about climbing higher than about remembering where you truly stand. If you let this imagery settle into your own experience, you might notice how many of your daily struggles are not against external enemies, but against internalized powers that question your worth and direction. The ascent described here is cyclical, not linear. You do not defeat darkness once and for all. You encounter it again at subtler levels. Each cycle brings more refinement, more discernment. The material world, in the broader Gnostic vision, is like a veil, obscuring a deeper reality. To move through it consciously is to reclaim sovereignty over your own awareness. The act of declaring freedom from the powers is an act of spiritual adulthood. It is saying that you will no longer outsource your sense of self to fear or habit. And yet, just as this vision of ascent begins to glow with possibility, the narrative turns sharply. The setting shifts from cosmic confrontation to human tension. Mary has shared her vision, and instead of universal acceptance, doubt surfaces. Peter asks, almost incredulous, whether the Savior truly spoke privately with a woman and not openly to them. Should they turn and listen to her? Beneath the surface of this question lies something ancient and unsettling. Who gets to carry revelation, and who is allowed to speak for the divine? Andrew voices skepticism, calling her ideas strange. The atmosphere thickens. What was mystical becomes political. What was intimate becomes contested. And if you are honest, you may feel this tension inside yourself as well. Part of you is stirred by the possibility that truth could arise from unexpected places. Another part resists, wanting certainty, structure, control. Mary's response is not defensive arrogance, it is wounded sincerity. She asks whether they truly believe she invented these words in her heart or lied about the Savior. In that question echoes the experience of anyone who has glimpsed something transformative and then faced disbelief. There is vulnerability in carrying insight that does not fit established frameworks. There is loneliness in speaking what others are not ready to hear. Levi then steps forward, addressing Peter's anger. He challenges the impulse to reject what has not been understood. If the Savior made her worthy, who are they to deny her? He reminds them that divine wisdom is not confined to their expectations. His words cut through the rising conflict, not to shame, but to reorient. The deeper issue is not gender alone, though that is part of it. It is the fear of losing control over the narrative of authority. Historically, this moment reflects the upheaval of early Christianity, where interpretations of teachings competed and structures of leadership were forming. A woman presented as a primary recipient of revelation unsettled emerging hierarchies. But symbolically, the scene speaks to a universal pattern. Wisdom often arises from the margins, and those invested in the center resist it. You might ask yourself, where have you dismissed insight because it did not come from the voice you expected? Where have you silenced your own inner knowing because it did not align with inherited authority? The clash between Peter and Mary is not merely an ancient dispute. It is an inner drama between the part of you that seeks control and the part that trusts direct experience. As the tension settles, the possibility of a different kind of community emerges, one not built on rigid dominance, but on mutual recognition and humility. And standing at this crossroads between ascent and resistance, you can feel the story tightening, as if preparing to reveal not only what liberation looks like, but what it demands from you. From that fragile crossroads between ascent and resistance, the story stops being about ancient disciples and becomes uncomfortably personal. The story stops being about ancient disciples and becomes uncomfortably personal. Because the real question is no longer whether Peter accepted Mary's testimony. The question is whether you will accept the quiet knowledge rising within yourself. The Gospel of Mary does not end in spectacle. It ends in a subtle but irreversible shift. The disciples, after tension and doubt, are invited to move forward not by constructing new chains of law, not by tightening control, but by embodying what they have inwardly received. Do not lay down any other rule, Levi urges. It is a warning that echoes across centuries. Every time living insight hardens into a rigid system, something essential is lost. And if you look at your own life, you may notice how easily your most sincere awakenings become routines, then obligations, then identities you defend, rather than truths you live. The Gospel of Mary quietly exposes this pattern without attacking it. It simply places before you another possibility. At its core, this text insists that liberation is not granted from outside, but remembered from within. The struggle of the soul, the ascent through powers, the confrontation with darkness, desire, ignorance, the kingdom of the flesh, the foolish and wrathful forms of wisdom, all of it leads to a single turning point: recognition. The fetter of oblivion is not a curse cast upon you by a distant authority. It is forgetfulness, and forgetfulness can be interrupted. This is where the teaching becomes urgent for our time. The material world described in the Gospel of Mary as cyclical and impermanent is no longer just soil and stone and empire. It is the constant stream of notifications, the curated identities, the silent pressure to measure your worth through productivity and approval. The archons may not appear as mythic rulers of cosmic spheres, but their modern equivalents are no less persuasive. Distraction, comparison, endless appetite, outrage masquerading as righteousness. The seven forms of the fourth power feel startlingly contemporary. Darkness becomes unconscious, scrolling. Desire becomes the restless need for more. Ignorance becomes certainty without reflection. The excitement of death shows up in the fascination with collapse and conflict. The kingdom of the flesh becomes obsession with appearance and status. Foolish wisdom becomes shallow information, mistaken for depth. Wrathful wisdom becomes anger, amplified and rewarded. And in the middle of all this, you are told you are free. But are you? The Gospel of Mary does not answer that for you. It simply whispers that the Son of Man is within you, that the divine presence you seek is not locked away behind institutional gates, that healing is not a transaction, but a realignment. When the text speaks of sickness and death as consequences of deprivation from the one who can heal, it is not necessarily describing physical illness. It is pointing to spiritual estrangement, the quiet numbness that settles when you live disconnected from your own depth. Healing, in this vision, is remembering your origin. It is turning inward, not to escape the world, but to see it clearly. The mind positioned between soul and spirit becomes crucial here. It is the meeting place, the inner threshold. When it is clouded by distraction, you live reactive and fragmented. When it becomes clear through reflection, courage, and honest self-examination, it becomes a lens through which truth can be perceived. This is not about adopting exotic practices or rejecting your everyday life. It is about attention. Where does your attention live? What narratives does it feed? The Gospel of Mary suggests that liberation begins the moment you observe your own patterns without immediately identifying with them. That is the first fracture in the illusion. Courage, then, becomes practical. Not theatrical bravery, but the willingness to question the values you inherited. The courage to ask whether material success has replaced meaning. The courage to admit that some of your desires are not leading you toward wholeness. The courage to sit in silence without immediately reaching for distraction. Be of good courage, the Savior says, not as a pep talk, but as an invitation into inner steadiness. Courage is required to release identities that once protected you. It is required to forgive yourself for the years spent chasing reflections. It is required to let certain ambitions dissolve when you realize they were built on fear. The Gospel of Mary's insistence that all formations return to their root reframes loss. What dissolves is not necessarily destroyed. It may be returning to its source in a different form. This is detachment, not as cold withdrawal, but as alignment with what is enduring. You can participate in the world without mistaking it for your foundation. You can enjoy what is temporary without clinging as if it were ultimate. The soul's declaration during Ascent that what bound it has been overcome and ignorance has died becomes less a distant mystical proclamation and more a daily practice. Each time you notice a reactive pattern and choose awareness instead, something loosens. Each time you resist the pull of comparison and return to your own center, a chain weakens. Each time you refuse to let anger define your identity, a power loses its authority. The journey described in this ancient fragment becomes startlingly immediate. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all is that no one can walk it for you. Not Peter, not Mary, not any institution. The tension between them in chapter 9 mirrors your own internal conflict between outsourcing authority and trusting inner experience. When Mary's voice is doubted, you are invited to examine whose voices you automatically trust and whose you dismiss, including within yourself. Wisdom from the margins often feels disruptive because it threatens established hierarchies, both external and internal. Yet the Gospel of Mary does not demand that you reject tradition. It invites you to engage it with consciousness. To preach the gospel of the kingdom in this context is not necessarily to speak publicly. It is to embody liberation quietly. To live in a way that reflects self-awareness rather than compulsion. To become a subtle contradiction to a culture addicted to surface. The opportunity here feels urgent, not because catastrophe is imminent, but because forgetfulness is constant. Yet awareness is never far. You are always one moment of awareness away from remembering. The text does not insist that this is the only way. It does not declare itself the final word. It opens a door and leaves you standing before it. The mythic language, the ascent through powers, the tension among disciples, the denial of inherent sin, the call to courage, all of it converges into a single quiet realization. Liberation is possible now, not as a distant reward, but as a shift in perception. And if you feel even a slight stirring as you hear this, as if something in you recognizes the terrain, then perhaps this is not merely an ancient story. Perhaps it is a mirror. The Gospel of Mary survives only in fragments, as if history itself tried to silence it and failed completely. What remains is enough. Enough to disturb complacency, enough to awaken longing. Enough to remind you that beneath the noise of the material world, there is a deeper current. Whether you turn away or lean closer is not dictated here. It is left open. But if there is even a small voice within you that senses that your life could be lived with more clarity, more courage, more inward alignment, then you are already standing at the threshold the text describes. The ascent is not somewhere else. It begins wherever you are willing to see. And so when the words say, "Go and preach the gospel of the kingdom," it no longer sounds like a command echoing from the outside, but like a quiet recognition unfolding within you. Not a demand to persuade or to prove, but a gentle affirmation that what has awakened in you has weight, has presence, has meaning. Nothing you have felt during this journey through hidden teachings and inner ascent has been accidental. The questions that surfaced, the resistance, the moments of clarity, even the subtle unease, all of it belongs to the terrain of remembering. You have not been too late. You have not been too slow. You have not been overlooked by whatever sacred current moves beneath the surface of things. If something in you stirred when you heard that the divine is within, that the chains of ignorance can dissolve, that liberation is a recognition rather than a reward, then that stirring is enough for now. There is no need to force it into certainty or turn it into a banner. Some realizations are meant to settle quietly, like light filtering into a room at dawn. The path described in the Gospel of Mary is not a performance but an embodiment, not a pressure but a presence. And perhaps the most honest way to preach such a gospel is simply to live with a little more awareness, a little more inward steadiness, a little less fear of your own depth. If you find yourself in a season of questioning, that too has its timing. If you feel between worlds, between beliefs, between identities, that space is not empty, it is formative. Nothing about your inner movement is wasted. What has been uncovered here does not rush you forward or leave you behind. It remains like a quiet thread, waiting to be followed further when you are ready to continue exploring what else may be hidden just beneath the surface. As I sit with the Gospel of Mary, what lingers with me is not a doctrine, not a system, but a feeling, as if a hidden chamber within the human story has been quietly opened and we were allowed to step inside for a moment. To me, this text feels less like a challenge to religion and more like a remembering of something tender and ancient inside the human soul, something that refuses to be reduced to fear or rigid certainty. It feels like a whisper carried across centuries, suggesting that perhaps the distance we sense between ourselves and the divine is thinner than we were told. And I can't help but wonder what stirred in you as you listened. Did something feel familiar, almost uncomfortably so? Did any part of Mary's courage, or the soul's ascent through illusion, mirror your own private battles? Maybe you felt resistance. Maybe you felt relief. Maybe you felt nothing at all at first, and only now something subtle is beginning to unfold. Whatever surfaced in you has its own meaning. I would genuinely love to hear how this journey met you. If one sentence from this reflection stayed with you, or if one idea unsettled you in a way you can't quite explain, share it in the comments. Even a simple line like, "I am remembering," or "I am still searching," carries weight. If this exploration resonated, you can also leave a quiet sign of support by liking the video and subscribing, so we can continue walking through these hidden corridors together. Your voice, your experience, your perspective are part of this unfolding.